If you're a serious buyer in today's luxury market here in Fort Lauderdale, this video is going to have more important information than anything you're going to be able to find on Zillow, Realtor.com, or any of the other real estate sites. In this video, we're going over the Fort Lauderdale luxury market for Q2 2026, including inventory levels, days on market, price movement, and buyer demand in the $800,000 to $3 million segment. This is the data that I use with my own clients. If you're thinking about buying or selling in this market in the next 6 to 12 months, this is the video to watch before you make any decisions. My name is Steve McAleer. I've been selling real estate in Fort Lauderdale for 20 years, completed over 600 transactions in this market, and I work with The Agency, one of the premier luxury brokerages in the country. I produce these quarterly market updates because the Fort Lauderdale luxury market moves in ways that national data doesn't capture. What's happening in the $800,000 to $3 million segment in Broward County right now is meaningfully different from what the national headlines are saying about the real estate market. And making a decision based on national data in a hyper-local market is one of the most expensive mistakes a buyer or a seller can make. So let's look at what's actually happening Q2 2026 Fort Lauderdale by the numbers. Before we get into the segment-specific data, I want to establish where this market is in its current cycle. Fort Lauderdale's luxury market entered 2026 in a transitional phase. The frenzied seller's market of 2021 and 2022, where well-priced homes received multiple offers within days of listing and buyers were routinely waiving inspection contingencies, has normalized. What we have now is a market that rewards preparation and precision from both buyers and sellers. It's not a buyer's market in the traditional sense. There are not desperate sellers and collapsing prices, but it's no longer a market where any listings at any price get absorbed quickly. The macro environment matters here, and I want to address it directly. Mortgage rates at the jumbo level, which is where most buyers in the $800,000 to $3 million range are dealing with, have remained elevated compared to the historic lows of 2020 and 2021. The cash buyer percentage in Fort Lauderdale's luxury market has remained high as a result. Buyers who are coming from the sale of a home up north, buyers who are deploying liquid assets, and buyers who are doing 1031 exchanges from investment property sales are less rate sensitive than the broader market. But financed buyers in this segment are working with carrying cost reality that is different from what it was 3 years ago. And that affects both their purchasing power and their psychology around offers and negotiation. The Northeast and Midwest migration demand that has driven this market for the past several years remains steady. The structural drivers, including no state income tax, cost per square foot advantages, lifestyle trade-up, year-round outdoor living, have not changed. What has changed is the pace at which buyers are moving from interest to commitment. The urgency that compressed timelines during the peak market has relaxed, and buyers are taking more time, doing more due diligence, and making more deliberate decisions. That's actually healthy for the long-term market, even if it means individual transactions take longer. Let's start off with inventory. Active inventory in Broward County's $800,000 to $3 million segment has increased compared to this time last year. We're not at the inventory levels of 2019 or earlier, but the market has moved meaningfully away from the severe supply constraints of 2021 and 2022. Buyers have more choices than they did 18 to 24 months ago. That's just the broad picture. The nuance, though, is significant. Inventory is not uniformly distributed across neighborhoods, property types, or price points. In the waterfront segment, specifically canal front homes with ocean access in places like Las Olas Isles, Harbor Beach, and Rio Vista, supply remains constrained. These properties are finite. There are only so many finger isle lots in Las Olas Isles, and there will never be more. Well-priced turnkey waterfront homes in premier locations continue to attract strong activity and can still trade relatively quickly compared to the broader luxury market. The supply constraint in the best waterfront products have not changed materially, and I don't expect it to. The inventory increase is most pronounced in the non-waterfront luxury segment, homes above 1.5 million in neighborhoods without direct canal access, and in the luxury condo market. The condo market in particular has seen inventory build, partly because the post-Surfside legislation has introduced uncertainty for some buyers who are now asking more questions before committing. Buildings that have unresolved inspection issues or underfunded reserves are sitting longer. Buildings with clean structural reports and fully funded reserves are still moving. The market is beginning to differentiate in the condo segment in a way it didn't 3 years ago, when everything was absorbed quickly quickly regardless of the details. New construction inventory in the Fort Lauderdale market is also a factor. Several luxury developments that were announced or begun during the peak market years are now delivering product, both in the condo and single-family teardown and rebuild segments. This additional supply has contributed to longer days on the market for some retail product in the same price range. It's worth being aware of the competitive new construction landscape when evaluating resale properties, particularly in the $1.5 to $3 million range. Days on market are the metric that I use the most because that's where you're going to find the most amount of negotiation opportunities. Across the $800,000 to $3 million segment in Broward County, the median days on market has widened compared to the compressed timelines of the peak market. Properties are taking longer to sell across most categories, but the average is masking significant variation at the neighborhood and property type level, and that variation is where the actionable intelligence lives. In the $800,000 to $1.2 million range, which covers the entry-level luxury and upper end of the traditional single-family market in Fort Lauderdale, days on market has extended the most. This is where buyers have the most choices, where the competition from new listings is most active, and where sellers who are priced at 2022 peak levels are sitting without offers. Properties in this range that are priced correctly relative to current comparable sales are still moving in 4 to 6 weeks. Properties that are overpriced relative to the current market are sitting 60, 90, and even in some cases 120 days or more. And those extended days on market are your signal as a buyer. Every day a property sits without an offer is a data point that shifts the negotiating dynamic to the buyer's favor. In the $1.2 to $2 million range, which is the heart of Fort Lauderdale's move-up luxury market and where waterfront single-family access begins in earnest, the days on market picture is more segmented. Waterfront properties in desirable neighborhoods with current pricing and good condition are moving in 3 to 6 weeks. Non-waterfront properties at this price point are taking longer and are showing the most reduction activity. If you're a buyer with flexibility on waterfront versus non-waterfront, well, the non-waterfront segment above $1.2 million right now represents the most negotiating room in the current market. In the $2 million to $3 million range, the entry-level price to Las Olas Isles, Coral Ridge, Victoria Park, and Rio Vista, the best product still moves. Well-priced, well-positioned waterfront estates in this range are not sitting 90 days. But the definition of well-priced has become more precise. Sellers who test the market at aggressive prices are finding that the buyer pool at this level is sophisticated, patient, and has seen enough comparable sales to know when something is overpriced. The days on market for overpriced $2 million plus products have extended significantly, and sellers who have been on the market for 60 days or more are increasingly receptive to real negotiation. And by the way, if you're a buyer doing this level of research, I put together a great resource for you. It's called the Fort Lauderdale Homebuyer Guide. Inside, you'll find information on neighborhoods and price points, what to buy, what to consider, and how to move here without second-guessing yourself. It's an excellent starting point, and it's totally free. You can download it using the link in the description. Now, moving forward, let's talk about price. Fort Lauderdale luxury prices have not collapsed. I want to be direct about that because there's a national narrative around real estate that suggests the market is in a broad decline, and that narrative does not accurately describe what's happening in this segment of the market. The waterfront neighborhoods that represent the core of Fort Lauderdale's luxury identity, including Las Olas Isles, Harbor Beach, Rio Vista, well, they've held their value well. Buyers who purchased well-positioned waterfront products in these neighborhoods in 2020, 2021, or 2022 are generally still in positive equity positions even after the market's normalization. What has happened to prices is more precise than a broad decline. The homes that have experienced price pressure are the ones that were listed at aspirational prices. Sellers who saw peak market comps and priced at or above those levels in a market that's changed. Those properties have either sold at negotiated discounts from their original price, or they are still sitting on the market waiting for a seller who will accept a reset. The price reduction data in Broward County's luxury segment shows a meaningful increase in both frequency of reductions and the average reduction amount compared to this time last year. That's the honest picture. The best comparable sales data, which are the transactions that actually closed, well, that tells a story of a market where realistic pricing meets real buyers efficiently, and aspirational pricing meets extended days on market and eventual reduction or withdrawal. The spread between between original list price and final sales price has widened across most categories, which means buyers who are doing their comparative sales analysis correctly are finding legitimate room to negotiate between the ask and the close. Waterfront price per square foot in the core neighborhoods remains the most resilient metric in the Fort Lauderdale luxury market. This reflects the fundamental supply constraint. There is a fixed amount of ocean access waterfront in desirable neighborhoods, and that scarcity has a floor under its value than non-waterfront products have. Buyers who are purchasing waterfront in the core Fort Lauderdale neighborhoods are buying into that scarcity, and over a reasonable holding period, the value proposition of that scarcity has historically proven sound. Understanding who is in the buyer pool right now matters. The cash buyer percentage in Fort Lauderdale's $800,000 to $3 million segment remains elevated. Buyers coming from the sale of a primary residence in a high cost of living market, selling a $2 million home in Greenwich, or a $2.5 million co-op on the Upper East Side are frequently entering the Fort Lauderdale market as an all-cash or near-cash buyer. That profile has not changed materially, even as national buyer pools have been compressed by rate sensitivity. It's one of the reasons why the Fort Lauderdale luxury market has been more insulated from rate pressure than the broader national market. The Northeast migration demand remains the primary driver of buyer volume in this market. New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and increasingly the Philadelphia area are still generating significant buyer interest. The Midwest, including Chicago, Cleveland, Minneapolis, Columbus, continues to grow as a buyer's original point. These buyers are not rate sensitive in the same way that a first-time home buyer or a move-up buyer in the local market is. They are making a lifestyle and tax decision that doesn't hinge on whether the 30-year jumbo rate is 6.5 or 7.25. International buyer demand has been an interesting dimension of Q2 in 2026. The Fort Lauderdale market has historically attracted buyers from Latin America, including Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, and that flow still continues. The strength of the US dollar relative to some of these currencies creates headwinds for some buyers, but the political and economic stability argument for US real estate, particularly in a no-income state like Florida, remains compelling for high net worth Latin American buyers who are moving capital in, and in some cases, families to the US. The buyer who is most active in the current market, the buyer who is actually closing transactions rather than researching indefinitely, is the buyer who arrived with clarity on their criteria due to their due diligence on cost of ownership before falling in love with the property, and who is working with an agent who has access to both listed and potentially off-market inventory. The buyers who are struggling to transact in the current market are typically the ones waiting for a price decline that the data doesn't support in the waterfront segment, or the ones who are applying national market psychology to a hyper-local market that operates by its own rules. I want to address something that the public data on the market doesn't address, and that's the off-market transaction volume. In a market where some sellers are reluctant to expose a property to extended days on market because they understand that public days on market is now a negotiating signal that buyers use against them, the private sale option has become more attractive. Sellers who are testing buyer appetite before committing to a public listing, sellers who want to transact without the disruption of showings and open houses, and sellers who simply want privacy have increasingly chosen to make their properties available through agent networks rather than through the MLS. For buyers, this has a direct implication. If you're searching for Lauderdale's luxury market exclusively through Zillow or Realtor.com or even the MLS, you're not seeing the full inventory. A meaningful share of the best product in Las Olas Isles, Harbor Beach, and Rio Vista in any given quarter does not hit the public market. It moves through conversations between agents who know the neighborhood, who know which sellers are open to the right conversation, and who have the relationships that surface inventory before it's listed publicly. This is part of the market where 20 years of transactions in Fort Lauderdale is not just a talking point. It's a functional advantage for buyers that I work with. The call I get on a Wednesday morning from a listing agent who is testing buyer interest before their seller commits to a public listing, the relationship I have with an owner in Las Olas Isles who's been thinking about selling for 2 years, that's access that public search can't replicate. If you're serious about buying in this market in the next 6 to 12 months, that access should be part of your strategy from the beginning of your search, not just an afterthought. Now, let me close with the practical implications of everything we've covered, because market data is only useful if it shapes your decision. For buyers heading into Q3 2026, the current market is the most favorable environment for a prepared buyer than Fort Lauderdale has offered in many years. Extended days on market on non-waterfront luxury product, increasing price reduction frequency, and sellers who have adjusted their expectations from peak market levels all create negotiating room that didn't exist in 2021 or 2022. Waterfront in the core neighborhoods is still competitive for well-priced, well-positioned product. Do not approach a Las Olas Isles listing as if it's a distressed opportunity if it's genuinely priced. But the overall market has shifted toward buyer-favorable conditions in ways that a prepared buyer with current data can take real advantage of. The non-negotiables for buyers in this market right now, well, get your insurance quotes before you're emotionally committed to a property. Verify the flood zone and obtain an elevation certificate on anything near the water. For condos, obtain and review all of their critical documents, including the structural inspection report, reserve fund status, and the special assessment history before you fall in love with the unit. And have your financing or proof of funds organized before you start making offers, because the sellers in segments that are still moving quickly are not going to wait while you organize your capital. For sellers heading into Q3 2026, the market will reward accurate pricing and punish aspirational pricing more clearly than it has in years. The buyers who are active in this market right now are sophisticated and well-informed. They've seen the comparable sales data. They know the days on market. They are not going to pay a 2022 price for a 2026 market. The sellers who transact successfully in Q3 are going to be the ones who price accurately from day one, who present their properties in excellent condition, and who have done their insurance and structural diligence proactively so that the buyer's due diligence period doesn't surface surprises that kill deals. The sellers who struggle in Q3 are going to be the ones who chase the market down with price reductions rather than meeting it accurately at the beginning. Every week a property sits on the market in the current environment is a message to every active buyer in that price range. And it's not a message that helps the seller's negotiating position. And that wraps up this Fort Lauderdale luxury market report. If you would like to work with me directly, all of my contact details are in the description. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.